The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the authors and do not reflect the opinions of JSOU, USSOCOM, and the Department of Defense.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the JSOU Military Design and Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Nathan Schwagler, Course Director of SOC 3440 Military Design and Innovation. And today we are joined by three guests. First, we have Paula Osborne, Foreign Affairs Officer with the State Department, coming from the Division of Design. Next, we've got Spenser Lee and Robert Metcalf. Both are instructors at the Squadron Officer School at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. And they've been leading an initiative to introduce a reimagination of some of their design curriculum and really pushing the envelope in terms of what design can look like at Maxwell. So we're very excited to have all three guests in the studio today. And with that, I'll offer you an opportunity to just introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hey, I'm Paula Osborne. I work at the U.S. Department of State. As Nate said, I work in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. I am a foreign affairs officer in a new office called Design and Learning. We recently went through a reorganization. Before that, I was a specialist working on Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Excellent. Welcome.
I'm Spenser Lee. I'm an instructor at Squadron Officer School. And in my current role, I'm the Reasoning Pillar Chair. So I design and curate the parts of our curriculum, our course content related to creative problem solving, incorporating diverse perspectives, and ethical decision making.
Yep, and I'm Rob Metcalf. I'm also an instructor at Squadron Officer School. I'm in charge of the Joint Warfare Pillar as it currently stands right now. And I'm also the head coach for our think tank team, which is a selective elective where we use the design methodology to solve complex problems.
Brilliant. Let's start with the gentleman here from the Squadron Officer School. When we scan the world looking for organizations that are invested in design and sort of really pushing the envelope in terms of what design can look like inside their educational institutions, as well as on the practical side and sort of the practice of design, we'll get really excited when we see all the great things happening at Maxwell. Can you just give us an overview on where's the energy coming from and what's going well for you guys?
Yeah, so this is Rob. So first off, at Squadron Officer School, we see about 4,000 captains in total force, so active duty, Guard Reserve, international officers, Department of the Air Force civilians, and it's actually mandatory for every active duty captain to come through our course. So our vision right now, our mission and vision is to enhance air-minded leaders primed to prevail in competitive environments. And that vision that we're trying to achieve, the primed to prevail in competitive environments, is really where we're leaning on the design methodology to try to come up with some new things. We really believe that design is one of the major mindsets that we need to focus on. And we've actually got a couple programs currently that use the design methodology. I'll let Spenser kind of talk about his core curriculum that we have so far in his elective, and then I'll follow up with some of the elective that I've been working on and how we're going to incorporate these things into a future curriculum that's really in depth with design methodology and other ways to get captains to think strategically and critically on problems.
Right.
Yeah, one of the cool things about the way our curriculum is set up right now is that our design lessons are centered around Project Insight. So what we do is we ask our captains to find an opportunity to solve some sort of problem that they see in their squadron or in their wing or in their group. So all of you Air Force captains out there that haven't been to SOS yet, start talking to your boss or people around your squadron where they see things that could be improved. And come to SOS because you'll have an opportunity to work on that, to develop that, to apply design thinking ideas. We'll walk you through that process to try to come up with a creative solution so that when you go back and you return from SOS, you can actually make some substantive change in the place where you work and live.
I love that so much. Let me just jump in here real quick. I think it's a core thinking skill in terms of being a reflective practitioner and being good at whether you want to call it human-centered design methodologies or creative problem solving, or you pick the method you want to bring to the party, but this ability to be a problem finder or to be able to sense your environment and find problems that are interesting. Because there's this great phrase, coming from the business side of things where it's like, look, every problem is an opportunity. And the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. But we get rewarded for being people who think in terms of solutions, as opposed to people who are constantly scanning the environment for interesting problems. So I love that you're cultivating that mindset at Maxwell.
Yeah, and that's one of the takeaways that I want for our students is to be solution minded. I think when we're going through the problem statement process, we're often using this language around like, oh, I see a problem. What's your problem statement? Like, what is the problem? And really what we want the students to do is kind of flip that mindset and look for opportunities. Like, what are the opportunities? Because we kind of have to just take the world for what it is. Like, there are a lot of constraints to these problems. What are the opportunities that you see? So if you can start to get students looking at it from that perspective, I think it's a lot more productive for the organizations that they work in.
Yeah, I love it. I think too, what's interesting about that is one of the risks that we sometimes run into when we're teaching creative problem solving and we're running applied sessions for units across the enterprise or external clients, we get really excited when we find novel solutions to problems that we think are going to fit, are going to work, right? But we oftentimes discount or don't pay attention to the system in which that new solution must thrive within, because every new solution becomes a symptom of something else that's going to trickle down and affect the larger system, right? Like a solution to one problem could become a precursor to another problem. But we get so excited about we just came up with something cool or creative or interesting or whatever, that we don't necessarily think about the second and third order effects that the introduction of that solution into the system will create. But I've been excited to work with folks from the State Department over the last couple of years who have come into our design teams here at JSOU, because they tend to be, we at least observe them to be natural systems thinkers. They have this sort of knack for appreciating the larger context or the bigger game being played. So instead of being really sort of hammer and nails, problem solution focused, they're able to step back and see the bigger picture and how the pieces are moving around the board. Paul, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what does design look like for you in the State Department? How are things going?
Yeah, I'm going to take a step back to explain my bureau a little bit. So if you think about the State Department, it's split into two main functions. There's the policy side and the functional side. And the policy side is what most people think of when they think about state, right? It's diplomacy, it's the embassies, it's the desks and so on. They don't have any money, but they have the soft power to develop policy. And then there's the functional side that's supposed to implement the foreign policy side that has all of the money. And my bureau is one of the biggest functional bureaus. We work in 90 countries. We're spending about $3 billion a year right now. So pretty huge. And we do civilian security assistance programs. So counter-narcotics programs, border security programs, police programs, all of that. So design for us is on one level, it's program design, right? The types of program, how to design these programs in conflict areas. And then another layer of design is that we just went through a reorganization because our assistant secretary identified that we want to be a more agile organization because there's all these new threats coming out, like fentanyl came out, huge problem. We did not see it coming, right? So now we're being reactive to it, and we want to develop into a more agile organization so we can be more proactive rather than reactive, which I'm learning is also something that you guys are trying to do here.
Absolutely.
So design for us sort of on this, me being in this course, thinking about design on the strategic level, how to become more agile, but as well on the more sort of granular micro level of how to do program design.
Yeah, so I love this because now we're sort of shifting away from that problem solution orientation as that kind of a limited perspective on the capabilities of design or the range of ways in which it might be applied.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can think about program design for an external audience in a conflict environment, security design on behalf of a civilian population that may not look or think or sort of behave like us, which is awesome, right? You have this opportunity to work across cultures. Organizational design, so how do we or how might we need to change ourselves in order to be effective in this sort of rapidly adjusting and transforming world? So lots of different ways to think about the application of design for a wide variety of stakeholders. Arguably, it's limitless, right?
Yeah.
All the way down to the individual, like how I'm living my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can design my life. Excellent. So we've got a diverse range of perspectives and applications of design here around the table. So I'd love to know, just from your experience, what's a win for you guys? What's something that's been going well or something that you guys are proud of in terms of design and the way you've brought it to life inside your organization?
So one way that we originally kind of got the the insurgency of design into our curriculum was through our think tank elective. So we have a highly trained faculty that's gone through multiple design courses, whether it be Lego Serious Play. We've had outside facilitators come in and teach us how to do things. Some of our instructors, such as us, have come through JSOU before and taken some of these practices, and then we incorporated it into that particular elective. And while we normally focus on DoD level issues or Air Force level issues for senior leaders, one of the recent ones that we did was reimagine professional military education for captains in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took a lot of the input that our students came up with the design process to design our new course. And with that, then we brought in more faculty, introduced some of the concepts that these students had came up with, and then ran multiple other design sprints to come up with some prototypes of what a more effective class could look like for every captain in the Air Force. So now we're starting to test those prototypes and see what works, what doesn't work, go back to the design process and redo that and see if we can be more effective and really teach these skills. Because at the end of the day, incorporating something like design into our curriculum while using it makes us better at facilitating and teaching it. But it also really gives all of our students that skill set on how to use design and how it can be beneficial. So we like to practice what we preach as much as we can, although that's not always the case.
Well, I love it because I think if you're not walking the walk when it comes to design, if you're not modeling what design and innovation behaviors look like in real time, I think it's easier for participants or students in workshops or classes to look at this as an intellectual exercise, as opposed to, hey, no kidding, there's meat on this bone and this can change the way we work, right? And the way we think and the way we create value inside our organizations. So that's exciting to hear that you all are able to pull that off.
I love the work that Rob and the think tank team have done and what they've done with our students. It kind of inspired us to start our newest elective, the AU Advanced Research Elective, or AUAR. And what we do is we just have individual research projects. So the students are working on something that they're really passionate about. So we offer a wide range of topics. And the reason that we do that is that we're not trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Like, we want something that they're already really passionate about, and we want to give them the space to do that. So we offer things like issues in standing up an independent space force, identifying deepfake videos, human-centered design. We have a few coding challenges, including an augmented reality app, a chat bot. We have something on Air Force, something called Air Force Maker, where students are doing 3D printing, 3D design. And the really cool thing about that is they're finding operators all over the Air Force and creating a network of people, connecting people who see opportunities in the places that they work with people who know something about 3D design to just kind of organically grow solutions. And in the new year, we're going to offer our newest topic on diversity and inclusion, and we're super excited about that. All of those ideas have a network of senior mentors out there who are experts in that field that can guide them through that process. And all those topics have a champion out there so that those ideas just aren't going to go into a box somewhere. They're going to come up with solutions or policy recommendations that are actually going to impact the Air Force today.
Sounds like you've designed the design. I think that's key because I think I've seen a lot of initiatives show up where it's like, hey, we're going to do this in this, simulated laboratory style environment or whatever. But if it doesn't have that external champion, or there hasn't been a pipeline established for how you're going to bring these concepts to life after they've left the simulated environment, or that safe psychological space, once the wolves come out in the organization or the white blood cells show up or whatever, if you don't have that champion already established, or you haven't been thinking about what the translation of the design deliverables look like in context in which they must thrive, you're introducing risk into the process, right?
And I think having that champion involved from day one drives a creative pressure.
Mm-hmm.
When the researchers know that they have something that they have to deliver, they're naturally just driven to deliver something. And it also gives them an opportunity to talk with that champion, with the person who cares about the thing that they're doing, and helps vector that towards a productive place, gives them a product that will actually be useful to that champion.
How?
Well, wow, you guys, we have so much to learn from you all. I will say we are much more in our infancy stages at INL. So my division was started over the summer. Our reorganization just happened. And prior to our division, there's pretty much no guidance on design. So we would have, the way that the State Department works is you have the foreign service officers who go to post 2 years and then leave. And so someone would come into INL, usually with no experience, they're a diplomat. They're like, hey, you're in charge of counter narcotics in Colombia. And then they would create in their mind from getting smart on drugs, what kind of program they want to develop. Super flawed, a lot of reinvention of the wheel we found with our programming, which is why they wanted to get really serious about instruction on program design. So we came up with a curriculum. We had a lot of a time crunch. And so based on general international development best practices on how to design a program, and created a checklist. But we have this huge tension between headquarters is like standardization. We want everything standardized. We know you have best practices in this, standardized. And so we tried to take that, create a checklist that injected some flexibility into the design. So leadership at headquarters they're like, okay, there's a checklist, but also there's some flexibility within that checklist. And what for me has been huge for this course is that for us doing kind of development type work, we look at USAID, Millennium Challenge Corporation, a lot of these organizations that don't do security work in conflict zones like we do. And so we try to take the way that they do development work and apply it to what we do. But it's so hard because we're in conflict zones. We're trying to measure, if we've increased transparency and good governance and so on of these governments. And so it hasn't really worked particularly well. And a lot of people are very suspect trying to do what USAID has been doing. And so for me, learning in this course, what you guys do as the military has really blown my mind into this level of flexibility and different scenario planning and so on that I can take back and try to inject more flexibility based on what the military does. Because leadership, if you say we're doing what USAID does, they're like, no, we're doing what the military does. It'd be like, tell us more. They do it right. Awesome. Especially since we partner with DoD so much. So they'll love it. So I have a lot to take back from what I've learned in this course.
Yeah, it seems like a challenge it seems like you really need some non-traditional metrics when you're looking at, how do we demonstrate that we've moved the needle on transparency or something like that, or good governance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So lots of room for creativity there. And it reminds me of a term that I heard once from a professor of mine. And she said, at some point, if you get good at this stuff, you realize what you're actually getting good at is you have what she called flexitivity. And this ability to weave flexibility and creativity into your thinking as a way of being. It becomes how you see the world, not a tool or a technique that you use,
Yeah.
I think it's kind of ties back to some of the models that we learned in the course, when you're talking about, simplicity, complicated, complex, and chaotic environments. You can measure those things very easily in a simple and maybe even a complicated environment. But when you move into the chaotic world and the complex world that we live in, those things aren't measurable. And so you have to find a new way that you can actually problem solve. So I think the design really gets after some of those hard challenges.
And I think it gives you permission and sort of an invitation and perhaps even an intellectual mandate to start asking questions about the organization itself. Not only how might we develop non-traditional metrics to start to assess these subjective things, but also why as an organization do we require ourselves to develop metrics to measure subjective things, right? What's going on above the board or behind the scenes that's requiring us to do this? And it's obviously an ill fit. Well, we do it anyways, right?
Well, so I actually am a performance metrics specialist. That's what I've done for the past 3 or 4 years. No, I'm like, we're talking about metrics here. And we have to because of Congress, because of who gives us money, right? And more, they want to see visualizations and they want to see, graphs going up and so on and what we're doing.
But do we now start creating graphs that just go up and stoplight charts and, pretty pictures to tell the narrative of what we want them to think in order to justify us getting that budget or sort of getting that money?
Yeah.
But that no longer maps to reality, right? So like, what game are we actually playing? What are we doing?
That's kind of this place where we're at, where we are like, are we going to develop metrics for storytelling and then metrics for the learning and what's actually going on the ground? We're grappling with it.
That's a gray zone, right?
It's a gray zone. And it's tricky because, of course, Congress wants to know what's going on the ground. Mm-hmm. What I think is critical is people understanding the long term. And if you're able to really chunk out smaller successes that lead up to that long-term outcome or vision that you have, I think you can potentially show the progress. It's just most people think of, here we are now, successes, winning, or, an Afghanistan that looks like the United States, or, whatever, like pie in the sky goal. And nobody's really thinking of measuring the in between because it's hard and it takes so much creativity and expertise to be able to do it. But that's why collaboration is so important, right? Being able to work together with subject matter experts or people that work in different areas, such as this group.
With AUAR, I think we kind of came to a similar conclusion that metrics are
Can
really
you just remind us again what AUAR is?
Yeah, the AU Advanced Research Elective, where we're having the students do those individual research projects. Metrics have been really important because it's hard to prove that this is actually creating value for the organization. So if I take an example with Air Force Maker, okay, so we're making all these 3D widgets, like what does that really mean? You need to sort of speak the language of the generals and say, well, this is providing X number of cost savings, it's saving this many man hours, it avoided this much schedule delay or something like that. You sort of need to speak that language. Otherwise, you're going to sort of lose relevance. And something else that Paula said really resonated with me is like, you're trying to do this mission. It's hard to find time to do creative things. But I think, like Nate, you were saying, giving somebody permission to do it is hugely powerful. Now, that's really easy to say in the ivory tower when the students come to SOS for 6 weeks and they're away from their day-to-day job and they have the time and space to do this. So one thing that we've learned from doing AUAR is how do we replicate that time and space that we're giving to the students? What are some creative ways that we can create that permission so that when those students go back to their day-to-day jobs and they're not students anymore, they're a pilot or a logistician or whatever, that they have that same permission to have that creative space. And that's a really hard nut to crack. That's something that we've been thinking about.
We discovered this too early on, in that you can't double hat people. Say, hey, you're going to do your day job, but now we're going to give you this design task for as well. Like you just came back from this course or whatever, and you got this new toolkit, and do your day job, but then also do this design thing too on top of it. That's a way to burn your people out, and I, it comes down to what I to build off your observations, Paula and Spenser, about this return on investment piece of it and measuring the value of design. One thing we keyed in on, that in addition to return on investment, in the very beginning of doing something like this, it helps to lay out what you think this return on imagination might be, right? And then being able to align that with your champion or your core stakeholders' value requirements. What's important to them? How are they measured? How's your organization measured? How do they think about cost structure inside of their organizations? And how on the commercial side, it's different from the government side. Obviously, you're not in the business of making money. Your job is to break even every year, right? But definitely something that you have to consider when you're putting together a program like this, because there will be people who look at this thing from the outside in and say, what am I really getting for my time and energy there? It's not just the bucks that go into the program, paying, Rob's salary and Spenser's salary and Paula's salary and Nate's salary. But in addition, think about all the man hours that go into it, the student time away from their jobs in order to be there and going through these workshops and through these training programs. So keeping an eye on the metrics, as much as I like to push back on trying to measure innovation, because I feel like that's an efficiency driven process. No offense, Paula. I think that gets us, if we get drunk on our metrics, we sometimes lose sight of the opportunity space. Get really good at measuring what we're looking for as opposed to thinking about what else might be out there for us. But that's an episode, that's a future episode of this podcast, I suspect. I know we're coming up against the time clock here, so let's do a round of hot takes here. If you could help me think about, imagine that you're finishing up your week here at the Joint Special Operations University Military Design and Innovation Basic Course. You spent 5 days with us introducing yourselves to the JSOU Flexible Design Framework, where we espouse not one particular methodology, whether it be Stanford or IDEO and the human-centric design movement, or the multidisciplinary design movement coming out of some war colleges around the world, or Lego Serious Play like we heard before, or biomimicry, or any of the other creative problem-solving frameworks that are out there. You've been exposed to and been able to sort of play with a bunch of these different concepts throughout the week. If you can imagine yourself as being in a position to write a little like pre-welcome letter to a future student who would be coming through a future iteration of this course, what's one thing you might advise him or her to tuck in their back pocket on their way into JSOU?
Well, I don't know that it's a hot take, but find a study buddy. There's this flipped classroom concept that you guys are doing, where you're going to be doing a lot of learning outside of the classroom so that you're more prepared to have a productive discussion once you come into the classroom. So some of that stuff can be really heavy and hard to understand. So Rob has been my study buddy, and just bouncing ideas off him and figuring it out together was really helpful to helping me comprehend the content before I came to the classroom.
Love that. Rob, what do you got?
I've been working with design probably for about 2 years now. And I think that if you're just coming into a course like this, you have to trust the mindset. You have to take risk. You have to allow yourself to be uncomfortable. And then you mentioned a lot of those other resources. They're fantastic. I think one of the hardest things about design in practice is a lot of people don't truly understand what design is. And go out, check out YouTube videos, check out some of these other resources, and try to get a basic understanding. So whenever we're doing these crazy ideas and playing with these wild problems, that you can really get that trust factor going and trust the process and the mindset.
Love it. Paula, bring it home.
I would say definitely come in completely open-minded, don't have any sort of, preconceived notions of what this is going to be, and don't plan on spending a lot of time in Tampa while you're here. I've spent probably 3 or 4 hours a night on the homeworks just because it's all new concepts and it's all so exciting, right? Like I can see how this can apply to my organization in so many different ways. And so, we have to keep thinking about what our project is at the end of this course, but I keep thinking about how it can apply in all of these different ways. And so I'm taking notes in all of these different ways and so on. So get ready to learn a whole bunch of information.
Are you suggesting that SOCOM, or the Joint Special Operations University here in Tampa, Florida in December is not the worst place in the world to TDY for a week? Is that what I'm hearing you say, Paula?
I would say, I hope you have this course just more advanced every single December that I can come to in the future. Exactly.
Paula,
All
I think you're doing it wrong. All work and no play makes Paula a dull girl.
All right. Well, you heard it here at the Joint Special Operations University Military Design and Innovation Podcast. Paula, Spenser, and Rob, thank you so much for sharing your morning with us. Future students out there and listeners, thank you for your time.